how we can make the world better. But we had to go through some painful experiences. One of those experiences, we were one of the biggest mobile game developers on Apple App Store in 2011. And in 2012, Apple removed all of our apps.
Hi guys, this is Wigo from Blocktempo. Today we are very happy to have co-founder chairman of Animoca Yat joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So before we hop in directly to the topics we want to discuss today, I want you to illustrate or describe Animoca into 2 sentences, because a lot of people are asking you to do the introduction, but it's unlimited time.
It's hard, but I would say Animoca Brands is a company whose mission is to deliver true digital property rights. And we do this in 2 ways. We do this in building infrastructure and building companies like the Sandbox, or Phantom Galaxies, and we also do it by investing. And today we have over 380 portfolio companies. Some of those companies we invested back almost 4 or 5 years ago, like Dapper Labs and Wax, Decentraland, but also Axie Infinity, OpenSea, and hundreds of others, right? So that's how we hope to achieve this, and we think of ourselves as building ecosystems.
So very familiar with some incubation and investors, right? Am I correct?
Well, I think incubation has a very particular goal, which is basically normally incubating a single entity. We are hoping to incubate an entire ecosystem. In 2018, nobody knew even what NFTs were.
Sure.
Right? It was very few. So how do we build an open ecosystem that embraces non-fungible tokens as a form of digital property rights? We can't do it ourselves. So we have to invest in all these companies that do it. But we're not investing in 1 company or 2 companies. We are investing in hundreds and continue to do so because we think this is an ecosystem. So yes, we're incubating companies, but the hope is to grow an ecosystem, not to build 1 or 2 or 3 or even 100 companies. During the whole FTX saga, right?
So after the FTX incident, what opportunity do you see from Animoca's point of view?
Well, I think the very first thing we had to do was assess the portfolio. Obviously, there's some companies that were in trouble. Nobody is not affected. We may not have direct exposure, we're not investors. However, we have indirect exposure because of the macro. But then now we see opportunities, because in a bear market, when people are building, they're the true builders, right? And they're the ones who believe. And also, frankly, valuations are also more reasonable because the prices have come down. And also the competition, right? Actually, in a bull run, it is very, very difficult to actually sometimes assess, because it doesn't matter how good you are or even how bad you are, you can always raise money. And so the ability to spend time and the ability to assess is actually shorter. In a bear market, you can really take your time to assess the quality of the companies. There's also less investors that are competing with you as well, because they are maybe afraid, or they won't invest, or they need more certainty. I also find that bear markets are better for collaboration. In a bull market, people try to compete to win often, which is, it happens and there will be cycles. But in a bear market, you come to realize that actually you can't do it yourself, which has always been our credo. So from our expectation, this is the time where you can forge better and newer alliances, strengthen existing ones, and forge new ones.
Yeah, as a founder of myself, I fully agree with what you say about, it's better build during the bear run, because the cost of the labor and the cost of the talent,
those are all side effects.
That's not unreasonable during the bull run.
That's
and
right.
Also, I want to share something different about the second topic you talked about, collaboration side. You talked about it's quite easy and it's quite important for projects to collaborate with other projects during the bear run. But I kind of feel like it's quite easy. It's easier to do that in the bull run, but it's quite important to find out the real collaborators in the bear run, because in the bull run, everyone is friend of everyone. But when it comes to bear run, people get very serious about their money and cash flow, so they'll be very selective about their partners.
Sometimes when the pond becomes smaller, right, then maybe you could say that people compete for a smaller pond. But the other way to look at this, which is what we see more of, is that actually when life is tough, you need friends, right? And you need allies. And it's not just about money, it's about business partnerships, alliances, collaborations. And there's one thing that's very different about Web3 that is, lends itself towards it better than Web2, is that in Web2, it's all about monopolizing. It's all about basically a zero sum. So when you have a shrinking pool, you actually almost need to fight to maintain or actually grow that pool at the expense of someone else. But in Web3, because it's in an open network, actually at the end of the day, if you are successful in your business, you will automatically grow the network, right? So in other words, if you have a big success in an L1 or L2 blockchain, for instance, actually you're growing the L1, L2 blockchain independent of whether other people succeed or not. And I think this is the difference here. And also the ability to work together doesn't require contracts or relationships. In Web2, there's a lot of friction. Oh, we want to work together? Okay, well, let's sign a contract first. And then I have to open my API so you can access it. Maybe I only give you this access because I don't want you to have everything. But in Web3, blockchain is everything open. So for instance, we are, for instance, shareholders in OpenSea, and we're also owners of Sandbox. We don't actually need to have Sandbox talk to OpenSea to work together. I can just list something on OpenSea. The fact that we know them and we can create a relationship obviously is powerful, but actually you don't need to create a special setup to do so. You can do so quite automatically, for instance.
That's part of the beauty of open source?
Yes, it's a beauty of open source, it's a beauty of open. So if you think about the history, the original history, even pre-Web 1, when open source was becoming a big movement, or actually an emerging movement, right? When we started an ISP in Hong Kong, this was in the 90s, we were building all on open source. The only reason we could compete with the big companies is because of open source. We are a small company, but we have the know-how and intelligence of a network of, at that point, thousands of other developers. And of course, today it's millions. And it is so powerful that even the biggest companies like IBM or Google or Facebook have to use open source. And so to me, that's the victory of open versus closed. And I think for digital assets and digital ownership, the same will happen.
Yeah, so your belief of the open source spirit actually come from you benefit from that before.
Correct. And I think one of the challenges in Web 1 was, you weren't able to capture the value. You were only able to share in the knowledge, but you're not able to capture the value in a fair way. So for instance, the source code that some developer created that eventually led to the formation of Google or the formation of Huawei or Lenovo or any company that's using open source, the original developer of that source code or the many hundreds of developers that may have contributed didn't get paid for that. But they may have been rewarded indirectly, like, oh, you're a smart engineer, so I will hire you for a big salary. That was the way they were rewarded. But in Web3, through the principle of ownership, you can actually now get a small cut or small share of your contribution. And that's what we see with NFTs, for instance. When I sort of trade an NFT, I can get a royalty because I know who is trading it and for what value. And therefore, I have a way in which I can audit and share in that value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the open source stuff just remind me of, you constantly emphasize how important the open metaverse is comparing to the, those huge tech enterprise spending billions of dollars into this space.
Yes.
And constantly criticizes about it.
Yes.
So what's your thought on this?
Well, let's talk about Meta, really. That's what you're talking about, right? They said they're spending $10 billion a year and they're losing a lot of money. And I have said this before. If they want to actually be a player in a centralized metaverse, $10 billion a year is not enough money. And I think even if they spend $100 billion, I'm not sure it's enough. Because think about it. Facebook has to create the entire infrastructure of a metaverse and maintain its cost in order to attract people to build its business on top of it, which means they have to incentivize people to build on the platform. Whereas if I build, for instance, on the blockchain today, first of all, for like NFT projects like Sandbox, we give 95% of the value to the user. Why would you share 50% to the platform? Number one. Number two, the network is shared across already thousands and thousands of other sort of ways in which the network is maintained. The Ethereum network, for instance, is maintained through staking. It's maintained through node operators that no longer that are independent, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a central organization.
It's a world computer, basically.
Exactly, it's a world computer. And the people who are on this world computer are being paid to support the network. And for someone who wants to build something on it, he doesn't have to pay in the same way. Yes, it may be more expensive per unit cost than, say, Amazon, AWS, but actually he doesn't bear the cost. The user bears the cost. And the user is happy to bear the cost because he has more value back in return.
What role will NFT play in the next bull run or the next 10 years, next 5 years?
We think NFTs...
In the Metaverse.
In the Metaverse, yes. In the open Metaverse. We think of NFTs as the absolute foundational unit of everything we see in the open Metaverse. And the reason why is because the first run of crypto, with Bitcoin and so on, was very financial in nature. Fungible tokens basically were effectively creating a Wall Street crypto market. And many of the people who joined that ecosystem joined it for that reason. In fact, the biggest critics of NFTs in 2018 were not people who knew nothing about blockchain. For them, it was curious. It was actually people in blockchain. It was the people who were early in Bitcoin or early in crypto that were most critical of NFTs.
That's true.
Because you can't trade them. They're not liquid. I can easily inflate the value. Like, they just didn't understand it, right? And the reason they didn't understand it is because they looked at it purely from a financial perspective. Because when people talk about blockchain or Bitcoin, for instance, they call it a store of value. They think of it in currency terms. But what NFTs are is they are stores of culture. It's much deeper than that. When you think about, for instance, our ownership of physical things, the example I often put is a wedding ring. A wedding ring is not very valuable, right? You can go to any store and you can buy a wedding ring and it's the same price. But the moment you buy that wedding ring, it becomes non-fungible, only to you. It's special to you and your partner. And if you lose it, it's really bad news, right? But more importantly, it becomes something that stores a piece of your history and your memory. Maybe you pass it to your children. And for instance, if you received something non-fungible, like a painting or an artifact or even a family home from your ancestors, there's something special to you that is not valuable in terms of how much is it worth, because it's actually invaluable, because it's a part of your legacy. It's a part of your identity. Why do fashion brands or celebrities actually engage in this? Because at the end of the day, they are agents of culture as well, right? They understand that, right? When you buy, for instance, your, Nike shoes, or when you buy, for instance, certain kind of Gucci or Hermes, maybe expensive stuff, or even when you buy a certain kind of car, you're not just buying the car for its utility. You're actually buying it because you're part of that club, part of that membership. It's a feeling you get as well. When people collect watches, do they buy it to tell the time, right? They buy it for not just because it has value, but also because it says something about maybe their life or their achievement or their perspectives, right? And that's basically why we think non-fungible tokens are so important, because they're the sort of main stores of culture on basically in Web3. And imagine if everything we buy today in the physical world was only for utility. Then we should all be wearing black. We should only have one kind of shoe, and we should only drive one kind of car.
True.
But of course we don't function this way, because we seek different kinds of value. We create invisible kind of network effects that mean something to us. And that becomes translatable with digital ownership. And the world is becoming more digital, not less digital, right? Our children ask them what they want. They want something virtual, and they probably want a special skin in their game. Why do you want the skin? Maybe you don't know, but they know, because all of their friends actually want the skin or do this as a way to sort of signal their social status or their community.
Because you just mentioned Sandbox, and like when we stare at the portfolio company, you see, for example, like Sandbox. What do you think it is currently lack of?
What do you mean in terms of Sandbox?
Yeah, or what do you feel pity for that?
I think in the case of Sandbox, because it's a UGC game, it's less about the content it produces, but what the community produces. Because Sandbox is a user-generated world. So the richness of that platform comes from the users making new experiences. Frankly, to me, that's why Sandbox is exciting. Because you have thousands and thousands of companies and people that are trying to make a better Sandbox experience. If you think about Roblox, for instance, why is Roblox powerful and so successful? It's not because Roblox made a great game. It's because the gamers in Roblox made the games.
True.
And some of them became very big. And that's what we think will happen with Sandbox. Minecraft as well. Minecraft is an ecosystem of games. It's a platform, but actually whether you play Mineplex, whether you play the Minecraft server of your friends, these are experiences that someone else customized. So I think for Sandbox, it is broadly the same. I will also add that, in terms of general onboarding for gamers, what's exciting is that gaming is a digital-first business, which means that all the value and the network effects at birth are digital. That means you can measure its truth, and you don't need an oracle to determine its background. And that also means that it allows for people to then move these assets into other environments simply because of the fact that you own it and someone else will give you a service for it. So for instance, I might own land in Sandbox. I know that you're this kind of user. In the future, someone else will provide a product that says, I know you're a Sandbox owner. I will give you this benefit if you try my game. Or I will give you a service to use your Sandbox land in my environment. In the Web2 way, you don't want that because you would lose a customer. But in the Web3 way, it accrues value to the ecosystem of Sandbox because by owning land in Sandbox, I now get more benefits.
Yeah, but we saw a lot of, like Gamefi project, they gather all the users through the financial incentives previously. For example, like Axie Infinity, Stappen, those kind of X to earn products. What's your point of view about the play to earn or X to earn, or what is the next like wave?
So I go back to this principle of ownership, and earning in the game is made possible because of ownership. That doesn't mean you must earn, it just means it's an option. Axie Infinity didn't become big because Sky Mavis sort of promoted the game in the Philippines. It became big because YGG was formed because they owned many Axies. And they said, oh, I own this Axie. Maybe I could do a business to help people in the Philippines. And they invented the guild system, which is basically the scholar manager system where you're able to basically rent these assets to players. And that business then became an earning model. But the thing that's important to understand, it is not the earning that came first, it's ownership that came first. And the network effect that was possible with Axie was the creativity of a third party. Sky Mavis didn't invent the guild system, YGG did. And then Axie became bigger because other guilds said, open market, they're like, oh, look at YGG, they can make money this way. So then you had Avocado, and then you had sort of Apricot, and you had Skillify, exactly, all those guys coming. And maybe there were too many people doing the same thing. And then of course there's a shakeout. By the way, that's how the real world works. I mean, I remember in Hong Kong when everyone was into boba, right? We had boba shops come everywhere, every corner, right? And then eventually we have a lot of them, but not as many as before. It's the same thing. Or, like fried chicken in Seoul, right? Right? After everyone wanted to do a fried chicken store, and then eventually you have a lot of them, but some of them will die. That's part of a natural market economy.
So as everyone knows, Yat is quite kind of like the face of Animoca, and did a lot of major success like previously. But if you got the opportunity to restart your own company again at this moment, what project will you do?
Well, I think this is a relative question, and the reason why I say this is because it has a lot to do with the founder's own sort of purpose and experience. So meaning that, for instance, one of the areas that we're focusing very heavily on right now is education. We think that Edufi is an interesting area because we can help, for instance, advanced teachers who are probably the biggest content creators in the world, but are actually the most underserved in terms of value. And as a result of NFTs, we can share more value to them. For instance, we just did an NFT auction, and we're going to do another one actually tomorrow. And teachers were making literally 1 year of their salary or 2 years of their salary in a single sale because they were able to enjoy the capital formation, the property rights of the products that they were delivering. But that may not be something suitable for everyone. Just because we say we think education is a big business, which it is, doesn't mean it's right for everyone. Each of these times I was building companies that had a particular purpose and mission, but they would evolve. And I think for founders that have an interest in the space, it's the same thing, which is you got to build on your foundation. So just because someone says finance is big, yes, it's big, but if you don't have an interest in it, if you don't have knowledge in it, then you can't do it. And for us, we were not really crypto OGs. We didn't enter the world of crypto with Bitcoin. We didn't mine Bitcoin in 2009, 2010 or something, right? We came in with non-fungible tokens. And the reason why is because when Bitcoin and Ethereum started to grow, we looked at it and said, that seems very financial to us, and we know nothing about it. And I think even if we came in earlier, we would still know nothing about it because it doesn't speak to us. But when we saw non-fungible tokens with CryptoKitties, that spoke to us. Then we understood. And it appears that we have all this knowledge, but it came from the decades of experience of doing other things in the past. So I would say for every founder who wants to build something in Web3, you have to build from your own foundation, something that you think has impact and purpose. If you can build for something where the mission and purpose is bigger than yourself, then you're willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. And I know that, the other thing that I think people should understand as well, I think, is that this purpose that you're trying to build can change because your experiences change. When people have children, for instance, often they say that this is a life-changing experience. It's hard to explain it because physically nothing really changes.
Do you feel that the same?
Yes, absolutely. Because when you have children, you have a more direct experience that your life is not just your own. Because you realize that actually your life is here for others, not just the people you work with, but something more deeper, more personal. And that allows you to then translate that.
Interesting. Yeah, one last question about the whole macro changes in this industry. Because we saw that more exchange from the West collapsed, and a lot of exchange got acquired by the East, and simultaneously we saw a lot of L1 chains. Those survive are mostly from the West, and a lot of primary DeFi protocols also from the West. I'm quite curious about what opportunities do Asia have?
So to me, I think there's a very big opportunity. But to your question around, when you look at L1, L2s, I actually think Asia will lead on the application side more because of the fact that they're closer to the context of culture. For instance, what is some of the biggest Asian exports? K-pop, K-drama, anime, manga, video games, right? These are actually one of the biggest, most influential Asian exports. You look at Japan with Sony, PlayStation, Nintendo, for instance, Mario Brothers, Street Fighter, all the legendary stuff. Actually, a lot of this comes from this part of the world. And I think they can definitely lead in this area, of which, of course, NFTs are a big one. When it comes to protocols, there's an opportunity, but it's a bit different. Because culturally speaking, when you think of blockchain, you can't think of it as just technology. To us, blockchain is a political system. There are elements of democracy, libertarianism, and freedom embedded with it, which means you have to also be willing to give up control. And if you do not have a culture of giving up control, of allowing decentralization, then it's very hard to run a protocol. And you can see some of the earliest kind of Asian blockchains, you could say, we shall not name who they are, have very centralized control or have maybe only a few block producers or basically not really fully decentralized. And so the community now sees that and can't trust it because they know that it can be very easily compromised. So I think there is going to be a difference between really the type of metaverses and the type of L1, L2s that are built because of the cultural context. Which also means that we may see, for instance, an L1, L2 emerge from this region that might have a very Eastern philosophy, right? We don't know what that looks like. But the beautiful thing about blockchain is that it's not exclusive. A lot of people 4 years ago were talking about, we always wanted to do multi-chain. We always promoted the idea that we think there should be many chains. But 4 years ago, everyone was talking about, I'm the Ethereum killer, right? Nobody really talks about that anymore. But back then they said that because they all wanted to control. They all wanted to be the ones that could own it. I think now we realize that's not possible. And I think more diversity is better.
Yeah, you have contributed into this industry for several years. And you have several, identity, including the chairman, co-founder, industrial leader, father, son. What incentivizes you to constantly building in this open metaverse space?
Our belief generally is that everything we do, as I said earlier, for founders as well, is to try to build something with impact and purpose. I didn't know maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago that I would be doing what I'm doing today because I was still learning, I was still evolving. When we discovered digital property rights, something really sort of awakened in our thinking around how we can make the world better. But we had to go through some painful experiences. One of those experiences, we were one of the biggest mobile game developers on Apple App Store in 2011. And in 2012, Apple removed all of our apps. Right. Now, our path would look very different if Apple didn't remove our apps. Maybe we would be a very big game company. and we would never go into Web3 because the system works for us.
Thanks, Apple.
Right? Yeah, and we needed to have that experience. We needed to learn, even though we kind of knew it, that actually we were now controlled by the platform. So everything I talk about is a lens of experience that we have experienced as an organization, and we think we need to improve on. So I would say the same is true for everything I'm building today. This purpose that we see comes from that history. Digital property rights is the only way in which you can have digital freedom, and we believe in that.
Awesome. Removing your apps is probably one of the major contributions of Apple in this industry.
Probably.
I'm
Yes.
joking. Yes, we're happy to have Yat sitting us here and spend almost an hour talking to us, sharing his insightful point of view. So pleasure having you, Yat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.